Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session of AKLF, Whodunnit. There are twists, gasps, there's blood, there's gore, murder, mystery, whodunit. And there is suspense, there is satisfaction, there are thrills provided by a crime and suspense novel that can be very addictive. And we have three writers here with us today who are addictive. So let's start with Anuja, an old hand at it. Anuja, what made you move to the crime genre, to the suspense genre, after you started with the Zoya factor? And also, how do you work it out in your head? For example, is there a murder that you conceive of, a perfect murder, and then you work a story around it? Do you think of interesting characters and then build a novel around it? How does it go?
I think it's, there's usually a theme that I settle down on. And I want to write about that theme and, explore what everybody's take on that particular situation is. In the Zoya factor, it was superstition. In Battle for Pitora, it was about idealism and politics. It's different each time. So I love having a nice background and an idea that everyone has a different take on to work with. And then a story in the foreground, which could be a romantic story, which could be a whodunit. A whodunit is also kind of like a romance, I feel, Only there it is like you have two love interests, and here you have a murderer and a sleuth. And they are also kind of, well, at least the sleuth is trying to find the murderer. I don't know about the other way of looking at it. So I like that construct, which always ends as a reader. I find I get a lot of satisfaction when a book does not have an open-ended ending, where things are cleared up and it is very clear. And what really attracted me to this particular, a whodunit genre is the whole thing of pulling a rabbit out of a hat at the ending. I like that old classic way of doing things and saying, I didn't see that coming, and that's great fun to do. So I do find that the two forms are very similar. In my own way, I'm trying to create a whole new genre which nobody seems to be buying into except me, which is the rom-com, which is romance and crime and comedy all together.
They're buying into it big time, I think. And I love the title. That fast is about the Karwa Chauth fast, I'm sure.
Yes, that's right. People say puns are the lowest form of wit, but I do love a good pun.
Yeah.
The first book was called Club You to Death. It was about a club like your Tollygunj Club or the Delhi Gymkhana Club.
Yeah.
This one is called The Fast and the Dead, and it's about a Karwa Chauth fast, which of course, as at least, all the desis know, is about you keep a fast so that your husband has a long life, and it's inauspicious to break your fast. And in the book, what happens is that this lady fights with her husband and breaks her fast, and before he dies. Almost immediately.
Yeah. Okay. Simon, your whodunit is more reflective. It's quieter. It's almost like you've consciously shunned the more violent elements of crime. Is that something that you wanted to do? That's something that was a decision you took? And it's also about, how your surroundings influence you, compel you sometimes to be not straight, to be crooked. So,
that's... well, first of all, before I answer that, I'd like to say I didn't intend to write a mystery, but the readers of the short story, Pearl City, which is actually the first chapter of the novel, they asked me to write the novel version. They loved the character, the single mother, who works in a hotel by day and solves people's problems at nighttime. They wanted to hear more, and that motivated me.
Mami Suzuki.
It motivated me to write the full story. And rather than write a whodunit, this is more of a whydunit. It explores the human condition and asks and answers the questions through her investigations. Why do people do crazy things? Why does an elderly man steal a can of beans in a supermarket? when he's got money and he's not hungry. And if we look at the social melodies of Japan, we could say that loneliness amongst elderly people will cause them to do crazy things, to break the law. And this is where Mami Suzuki comes in. She takes us through it.
And there's a lot of empathy there, I think. That's something that comes through. Okay, Patrick. Now, you've been in Australia for decades. And you said somewhere, I read, that you felt the need for an Indian voice in that Australian writing scene, in Australian literature. When you started writing, when you wrote this novel, you came to India. It's set in the Bollywood in Bollywood. And it's like you're exposing that underbelly that one has talked about often. The drugs, the crime, the sex. Is that because of your fascination for Bollywood? Do you think it works at an international level? Is there fascination? And also, why did you choose a murder mystery for your novel?
I might start with that last question first, because I'm still trying to figure out why I chose murder mysteries as well. But it goes back to when I was growing up as a child. And I was in fact just having this conversation earlier today. My mum used to go to the library and bring back maybe 3 or 4 crime novels at a go. And she'd read them all at the same time. So there'd be a Chandler in the kitchen, there'd be an Agatha Christie in the lounge room, there'd be a Mortimer in somewhere else. And as a young boy, I picked up these novels. And so I was enchanted by crime from a very, very young age. And I love how crime allows us to explore the shadow in all of us. And so I've been writing crime for a long, long time, both through my university career, through some short stories in magazines, and now also in Masala and Murder. When I was writing Masala and Murder, one of the things that prompted me up front, I was in Mumbai maybe 10, 15 years ago, and reading the newspapers, and it talked about the Maharashtra government banning black magic, putting legislation in to ban black magic. And I was floored. I was completely taken aback. I'd worked in government circles in the past and could not see this happening in Australia, for instance. And so that got me very interested in this whole concept of black magic, and I started to read more about black magic in the Australian prospect through the Australian Indigenous societies. I read about it in Hinduism and also in Christianity. I then went and interviewed, like you were talking about, an actress, a producer and a director from Bollywood. And I asked them about the mechanics of what happens behind the scenes, but also how does black magic and curses play itself through. And they all gave me their takes on that. And then finally, I was lucky enough to interview a priest who had undertaken exorcisms, and he told me about what that process was like. And so all of that was just grist for the mill when it came to writing this story. And that Indian voice and that Anglo-Indian voice from Australia, when my family moved to Australia in 1973, there were 10,000 people of Indian origin in the country. The last census, 2022, there's almost 1 million of us. But we still don't see Anglo-Indians and Indians in mainstream media. We don't see Indians in literature in Australia. We don't see them too often in television. And I wanted to take this opportunity to start to change that discussion. So in many respects, from a deeply personal way, this book is about voice.
Wonderful. I also wanted to ask you, Patrick, about what kind of research you undertook, because you've gone into the occult, into aboriginal spiritualism practices, Kali, the Kali cult, in detail. So did you have to do a lot of research for that?
Oh, so much research, so much research. And in fact, the original version of this book probably took it even further, and the editor helped me to find that moderate path. So I will always be grateful for a book is a collective wisdom product, and their wisdom helps shape it to some extent. But yes, so speaking to priests about black magic in Christianity, I do a lot of work with Indigenous communities in Australia, so I understood a little bit about that. And then a lot of research on black magic and Hinduism as well.
Anuja, your novel is hysterically funny and irreverent, like most of your work is. And it seems to be antithetical when you're talking about suspense and murder, side by side. But it works perfectly. So is that you? Is that who you are?
I think that humor, besides everything else, is a great coping mechanism. Tragedy, now I've reached a point in my life where I am losing loved ones. People around me, my friends, we are in that decade when our parents are leaving us. And I find that humor is great. I find there's a lot more of a sort of wake tradition even in our Indian morning rituals and stuff. And I feel that whenever things are too unbearable, a little bit of humor really helps. And I feel that there's a place for it. There's always a place for humor, whether you're writing about war, for example, like I wrote in Bars, or you're writing about anything, and loss, and motives, and, as we said, it's always very much why done it, and what is everybody's motivations, what are they hiding, what is their, what is their beef, who's salty, who's got an axe to grind, and all of that is really nicely, I think that humor just, I don't see why things have to be just dark when they can also be a little funny as well. So, there's, when things are sunny, then there's lots of shade, and then there's lots of shade, there's, you spark it up by making it funny. So I love humor. It's a personal choice, and I feel it really helps.
And of course, there's romance. So there's murder, mystery, romance. And that is something that's so charmingly put together. Do you think it cushions, as you said, the shock of criminality? And are you a romantic at heart? Are you a sucker for happy endings?
I'm totally a sucker for happy endings. I agree. It's again, maybe it's a simpler sort of view, and I don't go into places where many other writers who write crime do. But again, I think that nothing ever happens in a vacuum. You don't fall in love in a vacuum. There's still a political background. There's everybody else, and life goes on as usual, whether you're falling in love or whether your neighbor's been murdered. So there's always the context. Always the context there, and the context will have that. A romance might have some other things going on. A murder might very well have, people could be falling in love while someone's getting murdered, which is pretty selfish of them, but the emotions are heightened, there's trauma bonding, there's all sorts of things, and see, when you take a slice out of life, you're not going to get a clean piece. There's going to be lots of other layers and stuff in there, and if the search is authenticity, then you will try to get everything, not just the murder.
True. Simon, you also have the hint of romance in your book, the promise of more to come, especially at the end. There's Mami and there's Tezo. And tell us a bit about that angle of it, and also, do you think that provides a silver lining, to when there's despair and darkness, your social commentary on what's wrong?
Sure. What I've tried to do in Mami Suzuki Private Eye is flip the stereotype upside down and take away the hard drinking, smoking, gunslinging private eye with a woman always waiting for him at the end of a bar. Replace that with a hard drinking single mother who doesn't smoke but has a guy waiting for her at the end of the bar. Now, there's an age difference. He's a retired submariner, and she is a divorcee. So there's an interesting dynamic here. They're a kind of Sherlock Holmes and Watson, whereby they meet at the bar and they discuss. Mummy asks him for his advice, and he's a well of knowledge, and he helps her. But there's also something happening between them, and the reader's going to keep reading. They want to know what's going to happen. Are they going to get together? That question you'll have to read to the end of the book to find the answer to. So, the four stories, yes. Throughout the four cases, this is a novel in stories, 4 cases, they're all interlinked, and Teizo is always there by Mummy's side.
Okay, again, coming back to you, Simon, we've talked about the fact that often a suspense thriller, crime fiction, is a commentary on social attitudes, problems, what is wrong, what drives people to do what they do. For example, like the Devdasis in our temples, you've talked about Miko, am I saying it right? The maidens of the shrine. And at one time, they were abused, they were imposed on, violated. And you said in Isle of Cats that doesn't happen anymore. So is that a decision also of yours, to hold up a mirror to what is happening in society that needs change, that shouldn't be happening?
Definitely. If you look at the kinds of Japanese detective fiction that's written, there's basically three types. But the type this book fits is called shakai-ha, and that means social realism. And if anyone's familiar with Seicho Matsumoto, the great detective writer, who introduced the shakai-ha style, it looks at the social maladies and getting back to why people commit crimes. So in this case, because it's modern day, Japan, like any other country, has lots of problems. There's alcoholism, there's gender inequality, there's something called karoshi, which is death by overwork. There's hikikomori, which is social withdrawal syndrome. And there's johatsu. Johatsu means literally evaporation. That's when people just can't take life anymore. It's too stressful. They can't handle their responsibilities. And they just disappear. They vanish.
Okay. I come back to Patrick. Patrick, there are some really colorful characters in your book. So who's your favorite? Who stands out? I mean, you've dealt with them, some of them obviously the way they should be dealt with, quite tough, but with a lot of empathy for others. For example, Mabel, I mean, she's quirky, but there's something so lovable about her. So who's your favorite character?
I'm wondering, is Mabel your favorite character? So
I love that line especially. You know, it's so true. She's so real. When you're exasperated, and obviously they're discussing, the two sisters, the children, and you said that's what, she says that's what mothers do, you know, Indian mothers.
So it's interesting, it's a great question because it picks up a little bit about what we've been talking about already. So Mabel is based in Mumbai, and she is my character Samson's godmother, and he has to come back to Mumbai to solve this case. And he stays with Mabel, and she is, in addition to being his godmother, she is an intolerable gossip, and she can't keep anything secret. So everything he tells her, he knows is going to go to her group of friends at the church, and beyond that, and it does drive him to frustration.
But it also helps.
Oh, absolutely. But Mabel also adds some humour into the story, as Anuja was saying. And I believe that humour builds empathy. I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday about Hercule Poirot and his Offsider Hastings. And anyone who's read Hercule Poirot by Agatha Christie will know Hastings, a lovely guy who's a bit of a bumbling person. But what he does is he adds that nice little juxtaposition to Hercule Poirot, who is almost, so remote that it's very difficult to embrace and love. Hastings is that comic relief that loves Poirot. And so if Hastings loves Poirot, I can love Poirot. And so there is something about humour that allows you to build empathy. And that's what happens with Samson and Mabel. Samson's my favourite character because there's so much more for him in the next book.
Yeah. But, I wanted to ask you, how will this be really received in Australia, do you think? I mean, what's your feel about it?
So it's really interesting. I sent it to a publisher in Australia, and they liked it, and they said, Australians won't read this, so we think you need to send it to an Indian publisher. And I sent it to my publisher, and they picked it up straight away. And it's available in Australia, and the Australians love it. And in fact have embraced it probably as much as the people of India. But I think the themes, in any good crime fiction, the themes are universal. So the story is one thing, but the theme underpinning it, like Anuja was saying before, in Masala and Murder, the theme is redemption. And when we meet Samson at the beginning of the book, he is a guilt-ridden, broken man. He feels guilty at the death of his sister that he thinks he could have saved. He's lost his girlfriend, he's lost his relationship with his parents, and he's lost his faith. And through the story, he starts to reclaim these things. Yes. And that's the narrative arc.
Wonderful. Anuja, when we talked about problems, social problems, etc., and what is happening, attitudes, the dog angle, Pilla Party, right? And the dog haters. We all know people like that. I mean, it's so real and it's so fascinating. And is that straight from the heart? Are you a crazy dog lover?
Yes. But the thing is, in India today, I guess everywhere in the world today, there are these things that seem very small. In The Fast and the Dead, it's a stray dog issue, whether some people think that they should be put down and some people think that they should be loved and adopted and they're very good. So one thing is stray dogs that splits an RWA, which is our, resident welfare associations, straight down the middle into people who love them and hate them. There's also issues like parking, for example, the people it's such a tiny thing, but people may actually kill someone over a parking slot. Or noises, how noisy are you, and you are having a party and you're so loud and I'm so soft. So they seem like really small issues, but actually they become huge. Kids playing in the park versus old people walking there. So they're small things that are actually massive. And nowadays, nobody is just talking to each other, right? We're all talking to a captive, passive audience of 400 and other 50 people on that WhatsApp group. So everybody's posturing and everybody's sort of, it's not just you picking up the phone and calling me. You're passive-aggressively texting me on this group, and everybody else is, instead of watching TV like normal people, are on that group saying, ooh, look what's happening. So it is true. It is our reality today that things like that happen. And stray dogs specifically, I have this very aggravating habit of not recognizing and following human hierarchies. They tend to, I say in the book, they tend to snarl at billionaires and kiss up to beggars, because that's how it works. And that really irritates people who feel that they deserve to be kowtowed to, and the stray dog is just snarling at them and not doing the kowtow.
I love something else also. You talk about a hierarchy of who a person is. Somebody who's assured and knows where he or she is coming from and is confident is going to be able to adopt that indie from the roads. But somebody who's trying to make it big and show that I'm important, wants something with a pedigree, wants a pet with a pedigree. I love that.
Yeah.
And that is also so true. Maybe.
It's true. Well, it's really cruel, but it's coming out of a lady who's sitting at the top of, she's very aristocratic, and so she can keep indies. But if you're like trying to make it and you're coming up the social ladder, you better get like a really seriously pedigreed dog.
And I have to say, there's this Isle of Cats. I'm like a crazy dog lover. And I was absolutely horrified. No reflection, Simon. At the thought of this island in Japan, I hope it isn't true, is it? Where people actually go, there are very few people living there, and people go there to spend the day there cuddling and hugging and petting cats. For a crazy non-dog cat lover like me, that was horrific. Is that true? Is that true?
That's perfectly true. People will travel kilometers by car, by train, by ferry boat to these islands that are overrun with cats. And in some instances, they live in harmony with the humans, and other instances, the humans have all said, "I'm out of here. You cats can keep the island." So surprisingly, it's a form of tourism, and there's cat cafes, which are hugely popular in Tokyo and Osaka. So, in the final story of the book, Mami has to make the long journey to this Isle of Cats in order to find the suspect, runaway priest who has perhaps impregnated one of the Shinto shrine maidens, perhaps.
That leaves you enough clues to make you want to read that book. Okay, to come back to you. I wanted to know, Patrick, Samson. I'm going to come to Anuja after this because Bhavani is so clearly made for the screen. Do you see Samson coming up? Do you see your novel coming up as something that can be adapted for OTT, for the big screen?
I don't know what I'm allowed to say.
Yeah.
So there is interest.
Okay.
And the publisher is working through all that. But I'd like to see it. It's certainly, when I wrote it in a very visual style. And instead of writing a draft as to what the book is going to look like, I draw pictures. And so I have the scene in my head of how each chapter is supposed to look. And so I draw that picture, and then I write to that picture. And so the sequel to Masala and Murder takes place in Varanasi. And I spent some time in Varanasi over December just so that I could be there and sit in that space and be fresh with it.
Okay. So, Anuja, you have been, Zoya Factor was there, right there on screen. Did you like it, the film version?
No, but I never like them.
Because they don't see it the way you
Pricey
do.
Thakur Girls was also nicely done. That's on Hotstar's Dil Beqarar, which was quite nice.
Okay.
But not as nice as my book.
Absolutely. Usually there are very few books that I've read and seen on screen and felt, my God, this is fantastic. Usually you think, no, the book was better. At least I do. But I think that's because your interpretation comes into play, and the way you see it is not something the filmmaker is going to do.
Years ago, I was lucky enough to be in the audience when Ian Rankin was talking. And Ian Rankin is the author of the Rebus books, very, very world-famous books, been made into movies and television series time and time and time again. And he said he's never seen one because he's got Rebus in his head.
Okay.
And he doesn't want any other interpretation of Rebus to infect what he's got in his head. And I think there's a wisdom in that.
Okay.
No, I would.
Bhavani.
Yes, exactly. On that point. So this is new for me because when I wrote Club You to Death, there was nobody in my head. I mean, I was just writing whatever. I had this, close to retirement policeman who's very tight with his English teacher wife, and he discusses his cases with her, and it's a nice, cozy thing. They're a well-adjusted couple. They've been married for more than 40 years. That was the space I had a certain I didn't really have a face, but a very clear personality. And now the movie's coming out, and they've cast Pankaj Tripathi to play ACP Bhavani. In fact, it comes out next month on
that's
Netflix.
perfect.
It's called Murder Mubarak. Do watch. So, but now when I
You've
write
done
the fast
script.
on the head,
You've done the script.
I've not done the script, but they've been very nice, and I know everybody. I've seen the film. It's looking lovely. So it comes out on Netflix next month. But the point is that when I sat down to write The Fast and the Dead, now Pankaj Tripathi is in my head. Who's the actor? And he's an amazing actor. And he's lovely, but now it's confusing me. So when I'm typing, I'm wondering what I'm supposed to imagine. So it's a very strange situation to find one in. But I'm sure we'll all agree, writers, that you shouldn't have anybody else in your head. It needs to be, that's the only way to do
Your
it.
creativity.
Yeah.
How about you, Simon? You see Mami becoming one of those very popular screen detectives, private eyes.
I've never thought about that. People have mentioned it. You could break the 4 cases into episodes, and just to let you know, there are already 8 more episodes down on paper. However, I just don't think past the story. The film thing hasn't come into my head yet.
In fact, I was going to ask you about future plans, because you end on that note. She's setting up as a full-time private eye, so...
Yeah, at the beginning of the book, she's beholden to the hotel directors who won't promote her. She works in a hotel by day, but by the end of the story, she's the one in control. She's been fired from her job at the hotel because she was working 2 jobs, which you can't really do in Japan.
Yeah.
However, it's I don't want to tell you the whole story, but. She reclaims her agency. She's operating by herself, and she's the one with the power.
Yeah. Okay, Simon, I wanted to ask you, because you said you've got 8 stories lined up. How do you write? What is your writing process? Because I remember sitting at a session with someone who said that I write 8 hours a day. 2 in the morning before breakfast, 2 hours after breakfast, then 2, and then 2. Jeffrey Archer, in fact, Sir Jeffrey Archer. So that kind of made everybody keel over. So how do you write?
Well, I think everyone's got their own style. Japan's it's an extremely busy place. Everything's happening all at once, all the time. So you have to write when you get a moment. I'm very lucky. I teach at a women's university, so classes are for basically half the year, and the rest I can get my writing done then. However, I'll just go the Hemingway thing here and say that I think most of the story can be arranged and written in your head, and that's great. Because when you sit down, you're not going to waste time going over drafts and making mistakes and going back again. I find I've got the whole story in my head, so I can sit down and just bang it out, and that's the way I operate.
Does that work for both of you?
No.
No.
No. I try. That's the goal every time. That I'll figure everything out. And when I write, it will be the final draft. And always when I start, for the first 2 chapters, that's what I think it is. I this time. And then again it gets muddy. And then I'm scrolling up, I'm scrolling down, I'm lifting, pasting, chopping, changing. So, no, I mean... that's just something I could aspire to.
How about you?
Like I said, I have that vision in my head that I'm writing towards, and I do have a good understanding as to what's motivating the characters. But it happens so often where I know where I want to get to, and halfway through this draft chapter, the character doesn't want to do that. I'm sure it's happened to the two of you as well. And you sit there and you go, oh, of course he doesn't want to do that, or she doesn't want to do that. That wouldn't be true to who that person is.
Yeah.
And it happened in Masala and Murder. It took me off onto weird and wonderful tangents.
Yeah. Okay, I wanted to ask Anuj, I asked you, Patrick, who is your favorite character in this entire collection of crazies?
You have to like everybody. It's while I'm writing the book, I like everybody. I can't write them unless I know them, and if I know them, then I like them because I understand their reasons for doing things. So even if it's a murderer or if it's someone who seems like obnoxiously selfish or very difficult to understand or just plain boring, I have to like everyone if I'm writing them. Because that's the only way I'll be able to write them with any kind of authority and authenticity. So I like everyone. That's, yeah.
I want to ask you about your favorite character, but which of these stories was your one that resonated with you the most? The first one? No.
That's a really difficult question to answer. There are basically two main characters that run through all four investigations, Mami and Tezo. I really like Tezo because he reminds me of so many retired guys that I meet in bars and restaurants and places in Japan. Gentle, knowledgeable, wise, and not averse to drinking a little more than they should. Mami, on the other hand, is she represents a lot of women that I know, and my wife is Japanese and she's middle-aged, but we have friends who are divorcees and are having a very hard time making ends meet. So I like both the characters. They work off each other and they're stronger together.
Great. I have time for one more question, and this one I want to ask each of you. We, in the land, in the space of crime fiction, so all of you must have been inspired or liked crime fiction writers that you've read. So who would be, let's start with Patrick, who would be some of the writers you've read and liked over the ages?
I think if I go back to the almost the genesis of that.
You can go back to Enid Blyton also. That's okay.
I was a faraway tree person. So Chandler would be right up there for me. And then there's a few Australian authors, and one in particular, his name was Peter. Oh, it'll come to me. But he wrote The Broken Shore. And it's a beautiful book because you wouldn't know it was a crime fiction. It's a beautiful essay on the Mornington Peninsula, which is a coastal area of Victoria. Yeah. And a crime just happened to take place. It won the best crime fiction in the world because of its just beautiful prose.
And I know that sometimes childhood writers we've known and who've resonated with us. Daphne du Maurier, Alistair MacLean, simple stuff, but they also made an impact. So who are your favorite crime writers, Anuja?
It's so strange you say that because for me, there's nobody greater than Agatha Christie, for sure.
Yeah.
And she wrote so many books that you didn't actually have to go looking for other writers. You could just go back and pick up like 3 more Christies.
Miss Marple is my favorite.
Miss Marple is amazing. And so for me, there was just so much to delve in just in her books, because if it wasn't just Poirot, it was Miss Marple, it was Tuppence and Tommy, and it was Mr. Harlequin, and it was Mr. Cathoate, however you pronounce his name, and all these other people. Sometimes there were sleuths who didn't, they didn't make it to many books. They would just be in that one book. But I just loved how she wrote. I loved that whole feeling of, I have an Agatha Christie to read, so tonight I'll make a hot chocolate and I'll be up really late, and some 2 or 3 in the morning I'll figure out who done it. And I just loved that ritual. So she was the best. Everyone else, to me, I was comparing them with Agatha Christie, which is not fair on anyone. I love the Father Brown books, and I like some of the Nayo Marshes because someone said she's like Agatha Christie, and I sampled other people as well. There was like
Larson and Le Carre.
There was some Dorothy Sayers and P.D. James, whatever. The other person who I really loved, is Rebecca. And it's so strange that we talk about... yes, because half it, no spoilers here, but that moment at which he turns around and looks at his wife and he says that the woman in the boat isn't Rebecca. The woman in the grave isn't Rebecca. Rebecca's in the boat. And now look into my eyes and tell me if you love me. And I think I was in class 7. I was reading it in the classroom and I screamed and dropped the book because it was so bizarre that what? It just blew me away. And there's a similar feel in My Cousin Rachel. There's a similar feel in Jamaican Inn. And I just love that. I didn't know what it was called. Nobody explained genres to us. I never did English literature. It was just something you read and it blew your mind. And so you were trying to work with, that very DIY way.
Okay, quick.
I'd have to agree with Patrick. Raymond Chandler for wit and word economy, very hard-boiled. I've also enjoyed reading Alexander McCall Smith's Number One Ladies Detective Agency, very dreamy. It teaches you something about a country you don't know much about, Botswana. From Japan, Kaoru Takamura has written 2 massive volumes, 600 pages each, Lady Joker. Lady Joker, it's just an amazing feat she's accomplished. So many characters, so true to life, all beaten down by society, but all trying to get revenge on corporate Japan. So I would highly recommend Kaoru Takamura, Lady Joker.
Thank you so much.
Can I just on
Agatha
Get
ready
Christie,
with your questions.
Just on Agatha Christie, as you were saying, Anuja, the Murder of Roger Ackroyd. I was a 10-year-old boy reading that and realised, oh my goodness, I'm the murderer. It was amazing. It turned the whole world for me.
Questions, anyone? Questions? Yael, anyone? Yes, please. Quick one. We have barely 3 minutes. Aditya. No.
Yeah, there's something called content repurposing, and it's not always that you're going from books to films. Anuja has been really lucky because so many things have gone to the screen, but I know how hard it is in Bombay to crack the big screen. So you're from Japan, and there's this trend of manga out there, comics, right? Then there's drama, Agatha Christie, I think Mousetrap, right? And in Australia also you have very kind of, the only thing that I got exposed like Faraway Downs, but that came from Hollywood. So what are your thoughts on going in other formats other than film and say drama or comics like manga and things like that? There are a lot of ways, and like audiobooks and all that.
Well, I've never really thought of, like I said before, beyond the printed page. However, you mentioned manga, which is extremely popular around the world. Come to think of it, Mami Suzuki would probably translate quite well into a visual story. Lots of shadow, lots of noir mood, and rendered by these amazing Japanese manga artists. Maybe that would be the next big thing. Thank you very much.
You wanted to say something, Patrick?
Just that audiobooks are really taking off.
Yeah.
You know, and almost everyone who has read this has said, "Where's the audiobook?"
Okay. Anyone? I have a quick question. A very well-known educator, Dr. Anuja Dutt, very well respected here, said something that really made an impact on me. She said, we find middle school children, students, boys and girls, coming and actually asking for violence in books at libraries and in bookshops. Is that a phenomenon that you've noticed?
Yes, of course, it's very much there, you know. I mean, I think this conversation started about 8 years ago when 13 Reasons Why came out. You know, it was the series that went totally trending and viral, and it was very troubling because there's death suicide in a middle school. And then, of course, there's the video games that the kids are playing and watching. A lot of them are Japanese as well, and, from all over the world. And there's a lot of violence, a lot. And I think that, and of course, there's pornography, which is not violence, but it is very grown-up stuff available to middle schoolers, if not younger. So there's this whole thing of kids growing up in a hurry and wanting to be, saying that I'm also grown up, I can deal with tragedy, I can deal with violence, I can deal with sex. So there's a lot of, I think that's just a question of kids in a world, there's so much information and they want to grow up faster and take control faster. I think it's got a lot to do with that. I'm not troubled by it so much because I feel there's a lot of catharsis in that. And a lot of stuff gets sort of vented harmlessly because it's there in the books and makes them feel grown up, and they talk to each other and they are grown up and discuss it with friends and say, what would you do? What would you do? This is the character I like. This is who I like. I like the graph. I like the curve. I like how it's non-judgmental and how he matured and went to a better place. A lot of these violent ones are Bildungsromans in a way. The character sort of comes to a better place. So I would watch over them, but I would not discourage it.
Great. I think we are a little over time, but thank you so much, each and every one of you. Simon, Anuja, Patrick, this has been absolutely fascinating for me. Thank you for being here at AKLF. Thank you all of you who came out here to listen to this. And do stay on. There are some wonderful sessions. I hope you're going to stay for them and catch them.